From Mark's Gospel, chapter 12, come these verses. As he taught, Jesus said, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes, and to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces, and to have the best seats in the synagogues and places of honor at banquets. They devour widows' houses, and for the sake of appearance say long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." Then he sat down opposite the treasury and watched the crowd putting money into the treasury. Many rich people put in large sums. And a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which are worth a penny. Then he called his disciples and said to them, "Truly, I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." So ends the reading of God's Word.
Thanks,
Let us pray. Eternal and illuminating God, in so many ways and on so many occasions, you offer us a challenge. And again, in these few verses from Mark, we hear a challenge. We hear a challenge to give, certainly of our treasure, but also of our lives, and to place the entirety of our existence into your care. This is not an easy task. We resist. But give us the strength this day to try to live more fully in you. We ask this in your holy name. Amen. Just about every minister feels a bit convicted by this passage, because every one of us has been at some gathering in which we've offered a prayer that went just a little bit too long. At least a little bit too long for someone. I rarely attend banquets that are mentioned in the passage, and I'm seldom in a place of honor when I do. But there is an instance when I'm seated at or near the head table of a banquet, so that I might easily offer a prayer when I'm called to do that. Since I've usually officiated at the wedding right prior to the banquet, it makes sense for me to do it. And I guess they figure I know how to pray. So I do. And I can tell you that a wedding banquet is not a time for long, flowing prayers. For 2 reasons. First, folks want to eat. And second, folks want to drink and already have. So, even though the most beautifully crafted prayer with any sort of serious, let alone sober tone, just doesn't usually fit the moment, wise clergy keep it short, sweet, and hand off the microphone. Well, Jesus knew the allure of the microphone long before there was a microphone. When folks are the center of attention, especially when so many are hanging on the speaker's next word, it can be enormously tempting to keep them hanging with more and more words and draw the attention more and more to oneself. And the reason that clergy are so readily convicted by this passage is because we all know the center of attention should never be on us, but on Jesus Christ. And it's not just clergy. The challenge is there for all of us. All people of faith are called to raise our spiritual index finger and point away from self to Christ, the one to whom all eyes should be directed. Not everybody does it. It's no news to any of us that there's a great deal of personality worship these days. A celebrity is born every day. All you have to do is get out your iPhone, take a picture of your golden doodle, send it out into the internet, and your little darling pooch is a star all the way from here to Kathmandu. And that's a fairly innocuous example. But it gets more serious when those in positions of trust, clergy or otherwise, begin to cultivate a worshiping fan base. It happened long before Jesus ever stepped into his first sandals, and it's still happening today. The scribes mentioned in the passage, the scribes of Jesus' day were what you might think of as spiritual bureaucrats, attachés to the priests, but not really of priestly standing. But they were close enough to the luminaries to want to bask in the glow. And so it was a delicious temptation to pad their position and cash in on the goodies of greatness. I think if I had to boil this short passage down into one word, it would be trust. And the question is begged, where do we place our ultimate trust? I'm sure we've all heard some variation of the story about the gas station with a sign out front that says, "In God we trust, all others pay cash." And we laugh because we know that trust can be broken with a bad credit card and with other things too. Along with being an inspiring account of one woman's stewardship, this story also carries a much sadder undertone because it describes one of the faithful placing her last coins into the hands of the temple elite who were known to defraud many widows, leaving them penniless. It's a story about a violation of a sacred trust. Jesus was evidently able to see the holes in the temple administration and to call them out. This incidentally did not help his efforts to live a long and peaceful life. Systems of neglect and abuse never like to be called out. And they will do everything within their power to silence the one calling them out. Sadly, centers of power tend to get enamored of themselves, even if their original purpose was founded on rather high principles. Jesus offers a nameless widow as an example and as a challenge to the hubris of those in power. A woman who places not just her last 2 coins, but the entirety of her life into the hands of God. I admire her. I marvel at her faith. I'm humbled, and I'm even a little bit perplexed by the depth of her faith. And I have to wonder if, even in spite of all the shortcomings of the scribes and the temple, this woman was able to sacrifice so much precisely because she was part of a community of faith, a circle of love and support that would assist her. In other words, maybe she could see the strength even in a very imperfect circle. Like a lot of people, when I see holes in something, I'm reluctant to trust. While camping near Letchworth Gorge a bunch of years ago, a few of us decided to take a hike up near the railroad trestle that crossed over the gorge. And some of my friends decided to start walking out on the trestle. But once I saw the holes, I wasn't going to put my 175 pounds on that trestle, even if it had sustained the weight of huge locomotives. It's easy to see the holes and lose trust. I had another bridge moment when I was in a traffic jam that brought us to a complete stop at the very top of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. I don't recommend it. Because I happened to glance out the window and down by the side of the car, and you can see the steel mesh of of the bridge under the car. It wasn't the steel that bothered me, it was the mesh. More holes, and I got nervous. It didn't matter if giant dump trucks and semis driven back and forth across that bridge 1,000 times. The story presents a challenge to us. If we don't place our trust entirely in ourselves, as the scribes too often did, where do we put it? Especially when all we see around us are very imperfect people full of holes. Well, first, I want to suggest that trust isn't something we simply find laying around on the ground and pick it up, grab it, and have it. Trust is something we need to build. I watched a spider making a web not too long ago. They are beautiful builders. And they work hard back and forth across the expanse, reinforcing and extending the web until it becomes, proportionally speaking, probably as strong as that trestle over the Ledgewood Gorge. And I think we build trust in about the same way. One strand at a time, one relationship at a time, maybe one encounter at a time. We've all heard of the trust fall. If we'd had more time, I probably would have tried it with the kids today. And a trust fall, as you remember, is when you stand with several people behind you, fall back and let them catch you. And it works because there's more than one there. I'd be a fool to do a trust fall with one person behind me, even if he was a middle linebacker. I want to cover all possibilities. The strength is in the web, a web that we learn to trust as we gradually place more and more weight upon it. Very recently, a friend told me a story about her one and only experience of hang gliding. I figured the fact that she was telling me the story suggested a reasonably good outcome. This involved a two-person hang glider with the instructor in the back and my friend in the front. And what she distinctly remembered was the instructor's advice that when they tried to take off, when they began to take off, she was to keep running along the ground until her feet left terra firma. Do not stop running until there's nothing to run on. So you end up like this. And she did. And she had a wonderful glide, returning gently to earth in what I would call a trust fall, but a trust glide. We do our part, and then something bigger takes over when we reach our limit. I think that's how trust in God grows. One last example. In the physical therapy department at Thompson Hospital, there is a marvelous gizmo. You have to go see this thing. I call it the sky hook. But it consists of a very elaborate track running along the ceiling with a cable that comes down, and then there's a harness that they strap into the patient, around the patient. It's for people that are learning to walk again often after an accident or a stroke. And the device is electronically managed, and it has the ability to vary the amount of assist to the person using it. You can have 10% assist, 20% assist, and so on. And the intent is to give just the boost needed to enable walking while providing the challenge to the patient to continue to gain strength. The patient does what he or she can while using help from above to take up the slack. It's the way I like to think of God operating in our life. There for us, lest we fall, while challenging us to a deeper trust as we lean more fully upon the grace of God. Or as my hang gliding friend said, just keep running until our feet leave the ground.